Act 1. The Invisible Wall. Imagine standing in the center of a bustling, vibrant city. All around you, neon signs flash, people laugh, and conversations drift through the air like autumn leaves. You can hear the music of their voices. You can see the emotion on their faces. But to you, the words are just noise. The signs are just geometric shapes. You are present in the room, but you are locked out of the conversation. This is the invisible wall of learning a new language. For millions of English learners worldwide, the journey begins exactly like this. You start with the basics. You study the grammar charts. You memorize lists of vocabulary verbs. You use mobile apps that chime happily when you translate simple phrases like, "The apple is red." But then you try to step into the real world. You open an English movie, you try to read an article, or you sit down to speak with a native speaker and suddenly the apps fail you. The language being spoken in the street doesn't sound like the language in the textbook. It is faster, more fluid, full of strange idioms, and packed with hidden meanings. Why does this happen? It happens because traditional language learning treats English like a puzzle to be solved, a collection of dry rules and isolated words. But a language is not a math formula. It is a living, breathing ecosystem. And if you want to truly survive and thrive in that ecosystem, you cannot just look at pictures of it. You have to immerse yourself in it. There is one ancient, powerful, and deeply transformative tool that bridges the gap between a beginner's struggle and a master's fluency. It is a tool that allows you to download native-level English directly into your brain, at your own pace without ever leaving your room. That tool is reading. If you're finding your flow with today's session, subscribe to the Story Shadow and join our community of English learners. Act 2. The Power of Context. To understand why reading is the ultimate catalyst for learning English, we have to look at how our brains actually process information. When you memorize a list of 20 vocabulary words from a vocabulary sheet, you are practicing what psychologists call isolated learning. Your brain treats those words like numbers in a phone book. There is no emotion attached to them. There is no story. As a result, 48 hours later, your brain does what it does best with useless information. It deletes it. Now, contrast that with reading a story. Imagine you are reading a mystery novel in English. The detective walks into a dark, abandoned house. The floorboards creak. The air is thick with dust. The author writes, "The air felt stifling, and an eerie silence filled the room." Let's look at those two words, stifling and eerie. If you saw them on a flashcard, you might struggle to remember them. But inside this sentence, your brain does something magical. It visualizes the dark house. It feels the heavy, unbreathable air. It senses the creepy, uncomfortable quiet. You don't just see the word stifling. You experience it. You understand that stifling means hot, suffocating, and close. You understand that eerie means strange, spooky, and frightening. This is the power of context. Reading provides a natural home for words. When you see a word used correctly within a sentence, surrounded by a compelling plot, your brain forms a permanent neurological connection. You are no longer memorizing, you are absorbing. Furthermore, reading solves the great mystery of English grammar. Let's be honest, English grammar can be incredibly frustrating. The rules are full of exceptions, the tenses can confuse anyone, and trying to memorize when to use the present perfect versus the past simple can make your head spin. When you spend all your time analyzing grammar formulas, your speech becomes robotic. Before you speak, you stop, you mentally calculate the rule, you translate from your native language, and only then do you speak. The conversation has already moved on. Reading bypasses this calculation entirely. When you read books, articles, or essays, you see correct grammar used thousands of times over and over. You see how native writers position their adverbs. You see how sentences flow from one idea to the next. Eventually, something shifts inside your mind. You stop thinking about the rules. Instead, you develop an intuition. You say a sentence not because you calculated a grammar formula, but because it simply sounds right. This is the exact same way native speakers know how to speak. They don't think about adjectives or clauses when they wake up in the morning. They speak by feel. Reading is the fastest way to build that linguistic intuition. Act 3. The myth of the perfect dictionary. When many students decide to start reading in English, they make a classic mistake that often kills their motivation within the first 3 pages. They find a highly complex book, perhaps a classic piece of literature like The Great Gatsby or a heavy academic text. They sit down at their desk, open the first page, and immediately encounter 5 words they don't know. So they stop. They open a dictionary app. They look up the first word. They write down the definition. They read one more sentence, and then they encounter another unknown word. They stop again. They look it up. Within 10 minutes, they have read only half a page. They feel exhausted, frustrated, and stupid. They close the book and conclude that reading in English is simply too hard for them. If you have ever experienced this, let me tell you a secret. You were not doing it wrong. You were just using the wrong strategy. There are 2 distinct types of reading, and understanding the difference between them will completely change how you learn. The first type is intensive reading. This is what you do in a classroom. You take a short, difficult paragraph and you break it down word by word. You analyze the grammar, look up every translation, and study the structure. This is a valuable exercise, but it is mentally taxing. It is like lifting heavy weights at the gym. You can only do it for a short period before your muscles burn out. The second type, and the true secret to fluency, is extensive reading. Extensive reading means reading large amounts of material for general understanding and pleasure. When you practice extensive reading, you do not stop for every unfamiliar word. If you understand 80 to 90% of what is happening on the page, you keep going. Think of it like watching a movie. If a character says a word you don't fully recognize, you don't pause the film and run to Google. You look at their body language, you listen to their tone, you see what happens next, and you figure out the meaning. When you read extensively, you give your brain permission to guess. This guessing game is actually incredibly healthy for language acquisition. When you see a new word on page 3, you guess its meaning vaguely. Then, that same word appears again on page 12 in a different context. Your guess becomes sharper. By the time you see it on page 50, you fully understand it, and you never had to look at a dictionary once. By allowing the story to carry you forward, you build reading momentum. You enter a state of flow. And when learning enters a state of flow, hours can pass in what feels like minutes. Act 4. Choosing your reading compass. So, how do you choose the right material to begin this journey? The answer is simple, yet it defies most traditional educational advice. Read what you love. If you hate reading economic news in your native language, Do not try to read The Economist in English just because someone told you it would improve your vocabulary. You will be bored, and a bored brain does not retain information. If you love fantasy novels, read fantasy. If you love comic books, read comic books. If you are passionate about cooking, sports, celebrity gossip, or sci-fi, find blogs and books dedicated to those topics. The interest you have in the subject matter acts as a massive fuel source for your attention span. If you are a beginner or an intermediate learner, do not feel ashamed to start small. In fact, one of the best places to start is with graded readers. These are books specifically rewritten for language learners using simplified vocabulary and sentence structures. They allow you to experience the joy of finishing a whole book in English without the crushing weight of native-level complexity. Another incredible tool is the modern audiobook paired with text. Listening to an audiobook while simultaneously reading the text on a screen or a page binds two sensory pathways together. You see how the word is spelled, and at the exact same moment you hear how it is pronounced. You learn the rhythm of English speech where a native speaker pauses which words they stress and how their voice rises and falls. It turns reading into a complete multisensory language workshop. Act V, the lifelong transformation. As you make reading a daily habit, even just 15 minutes every night before bed, something profound begins to happen to your relationship with English. In the beginning, you are translating. You read the English words, your brain converts them into your native language, you understand the concept, and then you move to the next sentence. This is exhausting work. But over time, as the pages turn and the books pile up, the translation step begins to fade away. You read the word whisper, and you don't think of the translation in your native tongue. You simply hear the soft sound of a quiet voice in your mind. You read the word shiver, and you mentally feel the cold. You begin to think directly in English. When you achieve the ability to think in a language, the invisible wall disappears completely. You are no longer an outsider looking in through a window. You are inside the room. Your spoken conversations become smooth because the words are already living at the front of your mind, waiting to be used. Your writing becomes elegant because you have seen how masters of the language structure their thoughts. Your confidence grows because you have proven to yourself that you can navigate entire worlds created purely out of English words. Reading is not just a study method. It is an act of liberation. It frees you from the limitations of classrooms, apps, and word lists. It hands you the keys to the entire English-speaking world and invites you to explore it on your own terms. So, find a book that catches your eye. Find a quiet corner, pour a warm cup of coffee or tea, and open the first page. Don't worry about perfection. Don't worry about dictionaries. Just let yourself get lost in the words. Your journey to fluency doesn't start with a test or a rule. It starts with a story.